Hello and welcome to Faithful Discourse. I'm your host, Chris Henry. Love your neighbor as yourself. It's one of the most familiar commands in Scripture and, of course, one of the hardest for us to actually live. It's not because we don't want to, but because some things keep getting in our way. Today, I'm joined by two scholars who've written a book that asks, what if the problem isn't a lack of willpower or our good intentions? What if there are real identifiable barriers, psychological and circumstantial, that keep us from loving well? And what if there are practices grounded in Scripture and in science that can actually help? Katie Douglas is professor of practical theology at Seattle Pacific University and an ordained minister in the Presbyterian Church USA. Brittany Tausen is professor of social psychology in the Honors College at Baylor University, where she teaches in the Baylor Interdisciplinary Core. Brittany's research focuses on dehumanization, virtue, and how loving intentions can become loving actions. And together they've written a brand new book just out last week titled Love Your Neighbor: How Psychology Can Enliven Faith and Transform Community. It's a book that's part theology, part psychology, and entirely practical. Katie and Brittany, welcome to Faithful Discourse.
Thanks for having us.
I'm thrilled to have you both and excited to be able to join you from Seattle and Texas and Indianapolis, all in the same conversation. So thank you for that. So before we get into the idea of the book and the specific kind of approach that you take to the question of neighbor love, I want to hear about your relationship, about the two of you. You come from different disciplines that have different grammars and language, different methodologies, some different assumptions about what counts as evidence, perhaps. Tell me about the conversations where you realized you weren't just colleagues, but would become collaborators on this book.
Brittany, you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. Katie and I met the very first day I started at Seattle Pacific University, so the former university I was at. And we really started by just having a deep friendship. Katie had her youngest son with her during our orientation, and she was super engaged in all of the question asking and just kind of typical orientation activities. And I just remember looking at Katie and thinking like, wow, like she's someone I want to know. She seems like just a really beautiful person and just somebody who's a really thoughtful scholar. And so I think we started with a friendship. I actually asked her to mentor me. And then, that kind of evolved into maybe more of a collaborative relationship. She married my husband and I, and we were friends before we were collaborating. And so I would say it was in those kind of friendly conversations that we started to talk a little bit more about what are you doing in your classroom? What am I doing in my classroom? And that very first year, we actually had a really unique situation at Seattle Pacific University. We had hosted Tent City 3, which is a government-sanctioned homeless encampment on our campus. And Katie and I both have a heart for our unhoused neighbors and really wanted to try to find ways to help our students engage with the unhoused community in Seattle. And also to be doing that in a way that was edifying for our students, but also helping to improve the ways that they were thinking about and interacting with our unhoused neighbors. And so we approached that in really different ways. I approached that with my social cognition lab. We were looking at the very kind of broadest picture of how do SPU students perceive individuals experiencing homelessness before and after Tent City arrived on our campus. Because as a scientist, I'm just always really conscientious about we can have really loving intentions, but we need to be careful and just really thoughtful about making sure the impact is in line with those intentions. So I was trying to assess and measure that at a campus-wide level. And Katie was looking at more interpersonal interactions with her students. And so she could tell you a little bit about what she was doing there. But yeah, both different approaches, but similar hearts, motivations, and questions, I think.
Right. Yeah, Katie.
Yeah. So anyway, convicted by kind of the belief that we meet Jesus when we meet the stranger or meet those who are vulnerable. In my freshman course called Christian Faith, I thought it would be fun to take a guided tour by the democratically elected leader of the Tent City 3, who gave us a tour of this small city. I mean, they have a chain link fence around it with tarp to keep it private. There's a little village of tents. There's a little area for a larger tent that has food, and one more large tent that has kind of like almost like a bunkhouse feel. And as the tour guide took us around, he had his dog there, and my students loved the dog. And we got to see the kitchen where people were donating food, but also people were cooking for themselves. And they got to see how each little tent was decorated, and people kind of like a dorm room would decorate their tent, and how the heartbreaking kind of reality that children were living here. They also heard how at this at Tent City, they saw themselves not as impoverished or not as people to pity, but they said, we provide a service to the community, people who are suddenly urgently in need of somewhere to sleep at night. We provide a safe space for them, and we have a guard at the front and who will not let anyone in. And so after this experience, my students, it wasn't set up as an experiment. Genuinely, I was just like, oh, this would be great to engage these neighbors. Right. And so they came away from that having this really positive experience. But Brittany's findings were she said, okay, tell me about this. Because through our friendship, we just happened to say, oh, my students had this great experience. And Brittany said, well, that's not what the statistics say, that, this data I collected. And so as curious people, we found kind of fun ways to work together. And there was a fellowship we actually applied for and were able to travel together. Babies factor in many parts of our story. So we took Axel when he was a teeny tiny baby to Scotland to a conference, and were able to kind of formally start working together.
Yeah. So you mentioned sort of the family connections and, colleagues/friendship. Of course, writing a book together is a somewhat intimate act in itself. I wonder, what were some of the things that you learned as you sort of brought your research together, but also your different approaches to writing and your different understandings of what the project would be? Tell us a little bit about kind of the process that led to the book.
Yeah, you alluded to it a little bit at the beginning, even. And Katie and I were both smiling. Like, when you think about our fields having different ideas about maybe what counts as evidence. So really, we started writing together long before we were writing a book together. We've written journal articles together. We've written for the Christian Scholars Review together. And so we learned a lot in those processes where we were able to start to kind of wrestling with some of those discrepancies in our field. And having really honest conversations with one another about if this looks like evidence in your field, that isn't going to hold up as evidence in my field. And so one of the tension points has always been trying to figure out, where do we publish the work that we're doing, and how do we talk about it in a way that's authentic to our disciplines? We're not moving too much in the other direction that then there would be a question mark in terms of, does that hold up from a psychological perspective, or does that really hold up from a theological perspective? And there were some really tough moments through that, but I think that, because of our friendship, we were able to always go back to, we really believe that two disciplines together are better than one, and where we can find overlapping truths in theology and psychology, we feel even more confident in communicating those insights to the world, to say these are really faithful and also practical ways to approach these questions that started, again, with kind of this idea of how we dehumanize and then come to love more our unhoused neighbors. So I kind of started there with writing research articles, and writing a book is totally different. In my this is my very first book. It's not Katie's very first book. So I was very lucky because I had a guide to help me along the way. But it took several iterations of edits to get to a place where we were writing for a general audience, because I'm so used to writing just for a scholarly audience. So
I think one of our superpowers as a team, I feel like we're sisters now, and we've melded our brains, just so you know. You might see two people, but on this project,
one brain.
The brains have melded. But we're really good at awkwardness and conversation. Brittany, I will constantly, I will call her, and she'll be like, why are you always calling me? I'm like, we can resolve this better by talking than texting, or we'll I don't know, like we taught a class and it was on the one hand, like really great, but there were a bunch of things we did. We tried to maybe do too much for too many people. So we had like undergrads and graduate students. For some, science was not a threat. For some, theology was like not trustworthy. I don't know. I feel like I made a mistake here. What do you think? Or saying like, I think we could have done that differently. And so one of the things we write about in our book is kind of embracing that type of discomfort. So anyway, we taught this class and we said, wouldn't it be great if we could share some of this more broadly? And I said, I'm going to this conference. I'm going to talk, and I was kind of pitching a different book actually. And I came back and said, hey, I think we should write a book together. And Brittany said, psychologists don't write books. And I'm like, well, I have a book agent for us, so I think we should do it. And she's kind of game. So I was like, you're going to be great. And she's like, I don't know. And I'm so excited. And I was like, this is going to be awesome. Let's just do it. So it's been fun. And also I think I mean, a lot of people don't like group projects, but I love them. I think working with someone else brings out the best in me. I can tend to be lazy or not lazy, but like, not be as thoughtful about like, is this going to reach a wider audience? And so I think one of the things about the book we were really intentional about was making sure like big theological ideas were accessible and complicated psychological studies were explained in a way that's that people could imagine themselves in the study. So my hope, I think our hope together was that people would read this and come away feeling a lot smarter and equipped to make changes that are not very threatening, that are like, oh, I could do that. Or, oh, actually, when I think about that differently, it does change my response. So anyway, that's a big answer for your question about writing together, but it's been really fun. And we're already talking about like, what do we do now? What's next?
Well, and as a reader of the book, and I've been privileged to get an advanced copy and thoroughly enjoyed it. And I particularly would highlight the kind of practicality that runs throughout. I think you're exactly right, taking what can be big and even scary concepts and breaking them down into really practices. And if I would sort of draw a through line between social psychology and practical theology, practices might be kind of what draw both together, that whether we're talking about sort of practices based in social psychology, things that you might be asking folks who are in more of a client or counseling relationship to do, or someone who you're working with kind of in a more social worker kind of relationship, or you're a pastor, a counselor, somebody serving the community more through that theological lens. We're always looking for what are the things that people can do to more immediately and effectively take care of themselves and each other, right? So practices seem to me like a really important thread through the book.
100%. And yeah, I think Katie and I both have a critique of the academy that oftentimes it lives in such a heady space and really doesn't reach a broader audience or doesn't like connect the dots for why this matters for a broader audience. And so I think we both really have a passion for, if this isn't applied, if this isn't going to change people, if this isn't going to help people love better, then we're not really like into doing that. That's something for somebody else, but practical theology and applied social psychology, that's not like the way that we would approach our fields. It should matter and be very obvious why it matters.
And we also we both got tenure just a couple of years ago. And so it's funny, it's supposed to like liberate you or free you. And so I think we both felt freed from the need to publish just for the academy. And we're both feeling, and this was like 3 years ago. So politically we were in a different place, but even at that time we were both, and I'll just speak for myself. I just feel this sense of sadness about how hateful our world and divided our world has become. And if I want to form Christians, I think Christians should make the world a more loving place. And sometimes we think hopeful thinking or intention is enough, but social psychology actually gives us strategies that are like demonstrated to work and show us what the problem is so that we can make changes. And so that to me, when people ask me like, what are we going to do? I'm like, I don't know what you're going to do, but I tried to write a book with me. And this is my effort to like move the United States specifically toward more loving relationships with each other, especially across difference.
Well, that's a perfect segue to, I wanted to ask about sort of the uses and audiences of the book. So you talked already, and I think having read the book, I see clearly that you're sort of bringing big concepts, classroom ideas into more practical settings. Who do you hope will read the book? What kinds of settings do you hope the book will be read and discussed in?
Yeah. I mean, I think the primary audience is, the church. And so we're really hoping that like Bible studies and people that are everyday church going, like Jesus loving people pick this book up and, like Katie said, feel smarter for it. One of the publishers that we had, pitched the book to said, we don't want to publish this because we think it's too smart and we don't think people are going to want a smart Bible study. And Katie and I are like, we think people do. We think people want to walk away feeling like not only do I feel smarter, but like I have tools that have been vetted in a way. So it's not just about doing what's right. It's about doing what works too. Like, let's put our effort into things that are going to manifest well. And so I think that's the primary audience, but I would say one rhythm we got into as we were writing the book was to think about examples for like 3 different kind of types of people. So we're both moms and we're working moms. And so we're thinking about moms in that thing. We're thinking about college students. And so we're always writing examples to like, maybe you're rolling out of your dorm room bed, maybe you're doing that. And also came kind of to then a broader audience. And so I think that we got into this rhythm of making sure we're pulling examples from at least those 3 kind of category groups so that everybody feels like they can see themselves in the examples that we're giving in the book.
It's funny because I was thinking about, we gave an example, Brittany really does a good job of explaining cognitive overload. And so that's when you have too many choices. So in Starbucks, when they're like, what size do you want? What type of milk do you want? What top level, how many espresso shots do you want? What type of flavor do you want? And you're like, I just want a latte, But it's funny because we went through that chapter, we changed the example of cognitive overload so many times. It was I think we settled on types of spaghetti sauce or something like that. But you can look at a wall of options and you're like, I just can't, right? And so anyway, I think that you can see kind of in the examples, sometimes the audience we're trying to reach the people who buy spaghetti sauce and are like, why are there so many options? It's too much,
Yes, there are many examples in the book where I felt seen, both as a parent and a pastor, as well as just a person trying to navigate the complexity of the world. Absolutely. We just had a member of our counseling center staff lead kind of a wellness moment for our church staff, and kind of talked. This was in December, just before Christmas, and the topic was compassion fatigue. And she began by describing compassion fatigue, and she kind of looked around the rest of the staff and she said, I feel like I don't need to explain this to you. I feel like this is where you live your life in the month of December on a church staff. So I think those moments where, again, these concepts become, this is you standing in line at the grocery store. This is you walking by someone on the sidewalk and trying to decide what is the loving action in this moment. These aren't ideas that live in books or in our minds. They're decisions we make every day. And that really starts with the title of the book. And I wanted to explore that just a little bit because, writing for the church or writing for people who are seeking to live faithfully, seeking to follow Jesus, love your neighbor is sort of number one. It's the thing all of us are supposed to be doing, not just collectively, but individually as well. But Brittany, I wonder through the lens of psychology, what does neighbor love look like and mean, and how in conversation with each other did you two think through that title? And please don't tell me the publisher just told you this was going to be the title of the book. What does neighbor love mean from your different lenses?
Yeah, that's a great question. Neighbor love is not language that you would typically see in social psychology. We talk about pro-social behavior. And so any type of pro-social behavior is like kindness directed at somebody else, some sort of action that would uplift somebody else. And then there's different types of pro-social behavior. So altruism would be a type of pro-social behavior that has a potential cost to oneself, but other types of pro-social behavior don't necessarily have a potential cost to oneself and may even be self-beneficial. And so that language is maybe more familiar to me from a discipline standpoint, but I think the language of neighbor love is one I've always connected to pro-social behavior just because of my faith background and the way that I was raised. And so this came to mind earlier when we were chatting that, I think part of the reason why Katie and I have been able to work together so well across disciplines is because we both are deeply faithful people, and we are both people that really care about science. Like Katie has a really strong, positive opinion of science, and I have a very strong, positive opinion of faith, and I have a faith myself. We both do our best to grow and learn in other disciplines. And I haven't always had that experience, right? Like I've worked at places and worked with psychologists who did not want to even dip a toe in the water of having conversations about faith. And so I've actually been much more reticent to meld the two because I feel like I've been burned in those spaces, trying to be a person of faith and a person who cares about science. And working with Katie has been so helpful for me because it's helped kind of lower my fears, I guess, about psychologists aren't going to value this work, or they're going to think poorly of me because I'm talking about faith. But really just leaning into this is who I am. I want to be an authentic person in these spaces. I want to be able to bring my faith and science to the door and say, I don't have to pick. It doesn't have to be an either or. I don't think God's threatened by science. I actually think science can help us learn a lot about God. And so to circle back to your question, maybe the publisher helped us a little bit, but also I think that this idea of neighbor love and loving better was always the core of the book. And so if you want the insider trade secret, that's what we had initially called it, is loving better. And they kind of helped us get to loving better with your neighbor, but the neighbor was absolutely always there. And then we get into what they mean by neighbor, and it's yeah.
I mean, the guiding story that we start with from scripture is the Good Samaritan, which every preacher has preached on. Every person in a church has heard this story, and it's because it's a rich story and it's a complicated story. And theologians have talked about who am I in that story, but also where is Christ? Am I the one who's the Samaritan lying by the side of the road? We usually think of ourselves as the helper. So it's a very, it's a rich story that's been important in the field of Christian ethics. And I mean, when I was a youth minister, we had t-shirts made, love God, love people. We were it's kind of if you want a mission statement for being a disciple of Jesus Christ, it's kind of the big one. So I would say that was always kind of the guiding or the framing big idea in the book. And a big part of it is, and what's also there in the Good Samaritan story is it's tricky. We can think we're loving people when we're not. We're being jerks, or we're being elitist, or we don't have enough time or attention. And so a lot of the psychological concepts that we unpack and explain are there in that story. So actually what was sort of funny is we're we could use the Good Samaritan story again. And I'm wait, let's go find another. There's scripture's rich with stories. So my hope was to bring in, to take these new to us psychological ideas and say, look how scripture, when we think about it through that lens, it's opened up in a new way for us that was maybe always there. Or maybe this is something from all time Christians have always known, that, your presence with someone is real love that really relieves pain, that alleviates suffering. And so anyway, it was a really fun, for me, kind of a vibrant way to grow in my own faith. And then also writing this book has been realizing how big of a hypocrite I am every single day. I'm oh my gosh, this is what's happening right now. I'm totally driving past this person. I'm in a hurry. They need help. I'm not stopping. I literally texted. So I have an alley behind my house, and there was a woman asleep or passed out behind my house just a couple of months ago. And I'm in a hurry to get to work. So I call my next door neighbor. I'm hey, there's somebody in the alley. I've called 911 to get medical help, but not, emergency help. And I'm in a hurry on my way to work. And I'm this could have gone in the book as another example of us messing it up. And then I'm texting Brittany, guess what I did today? I should have stopped to help. But I think the hopeful thing to me in the book is the first step toward change is just awareness. Like, oh, I'm choosing right now to be on time to teach my students, which is not a bad thing, but it means like if I would have left 15 minutes earlier, I probably would have had time to actually get out of my car and stop and help and check in on somebody, you know?
Yeah. You've given us the perfect segue to these sort of circumstances that get in the way, because I think you just named at least two of them just in that one example. And I think one of the things that was helpful to me about that section of the book was these aren't isolated circumstances, right? We're often dealing with multiple at the same time. So the section is circumstances that get in the way, but the first circumstance you name is nothing. So tell me a little bit about what nothing means in this context.
You're going to have to remind us, I think, a little bit about what
you mean, like noticing your neighbor. I literally have to pull out the book sometimes, like when you don't even notice, when you just don't even notice.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, it connects directly to what Katie was saying. I mean, there's just like a whole framework for social psychology in terms of what predicts helping behavior, right? And the very first step is kind of obvious, but also something we miss all the time and we don't structure our lives around well, which is just to say, if you don't notice an event, you're not going to stop and help for it. So if you don't notice a kid has fallen and scraped their knee, or you don't notice the flat tire in the car on the side of the road, like you can't possibly help things you don't see, you're not aware of. And so that's kind of what Katie is saying too, is this awareness is so important, not only of like our own biases or mental shortcuts that kind of get in the way, but also just in terms of the way that we think about other people in our environments. And so this goes back to the Good Samaritan story, but psychologists have actually done a Good Samaritan study where they set people up to encounter somebody who's in need, and either they're sprinting past them or they have kind of casually enough time to get where they're trying to go. And they look to see who helps, and the people who stop to help are just the people that have time. And arguably a big piece of that is because they also have time to be looking around to notice the event. And I think as a professor, and especially a professor over the last 10 years, watching how much now people just, put in their AirPods or put on their headphones and it's head down, kind of walk to class. I'm not hearing other things. I'm not seeing other things. I'm just not looking around me, noticing things in my environment. I think that we're not putting ourselves in situations to be able to show up. Like God might be giving us opportunities to help other people, and we're just missing them because we're not looking.
And so, even more profound about that study was that it was done with seminarians.
Yeah, I remember that.
And it was at Princeton Theological Seminary. So I'm always like, I want to know where it was. Like, I want to go recreate it. But
well, and weren't they asked to like preach a sermon on the Good Samaritan, and then they were on their way to go preach that sermon when the person in need presented themselves? Am I remembering that correctly?
Yes. Some of them were. And then some
so preachers immersed in this story still, don't stop to help because they've got to go preach the sermon about the person who stopped to help.
That's right. Yeah. Half of those people were, and then half of them were like getting ready to go talk about job prospects for seminarians. And so they wanted to see like if it's top of mind, this neighbor love idea, does that predict helping? And what they found is no, it doesn't. The only thing that's predicting helping here is if you actually have time to stop and help. So
yeah. So this awareness question tightly interlinked with the pace at which we live our lives. So I can't remember the name of I think it was a social psychologist who coined the phrase continuous partial attention, that we're always paying part of our attention to a variety of different things. So it's not that we're not paying attention, it's that we're paying attention to so many things simultaneously. We know, so much about what's happening in the world, in our own lives. We're so busy, our lives are so full that nothing gets all of our attention for any meaningful amount of time.
Yeah. And I think, I like to talk to students about this too, this misnomer that we can multitask, because we really can't. Like our attention is just toggling back and forth between things. And so when you have your cell phone and you're driving, or when you've got your cell phone and your kid sitting in front of you and you're trying to have a conversation with them, you really aren't 100% present. And there's a beautiful quote in the book we use, and I think we used it several times and then we're able to catch that we were overusing it. But it's just all about, the gift of your attention and your presence, and that it really is like a miracle to give someone your full attention and presence. And so I think that illusion of continuous attention is one to be mindful of as well.
And if if we weren't aware of the fact that attention has high value and the use of our attention is often the sort of currency of our love, then certainly the marketplace teaches us this, right? That the commodification of attention, I mean, attention is sort of the coin of the realm for big business at this point as well, right? Is that...
Yeah, I know many friends, social psychologists that have left to like Meta and other places, and they just say you have to be prepared to like sell your soul to an ad company, and also to know that like if they're not selling you something, you are the product, like you are being sold, like your attention is what's being sold. So I think that it's noteworthy.
Yeah. So what are some sort of antidotes to continuous partial attention, to hurrying, to not noticing? How do we cultivate awareness? Are there practices that either psychology or practical theology can give us to become more attentive in the way that we live and therefore love?
Yeah, I think the way you curate your environment is the most important thing, to be honest. We can try to say, like, let me maintain the level of chaos in my environment or the imaginative attention-grabbing stimuli in my environment and try to just like will myself through it. But willpower is never going to be sufficient for that. So, I mean, the most classic example of things like this in social psychology are like, if you don't want to eat a bag of chips, like don't buy the chips. And the further even, like you set a bowl of candy away from somebody, the less they're going to eat. Like anything that makes it harder for us to do something, we're not going to do it. And so if you leave your cell phone in another room when you're having a conversation with somebody, it's more effort to get up and go look at it. Like you're less likely to go do it. And so I think two that we talk about in the book, and like one that, Katie said, like this book convicts the two of us all the time. Like we are busy people. We are constantly rushing from point A to point B. But scheduling like buffer time in your schedule is something I'm trying really intentionally to do. I used to book meetings back to back to back to back, and now I'm 15 minutes in between meetings. And it's amazing what that does. Like even just 15 minutes for opening up space to like be praying for a student or to hear a story that I might have kind of rushed through or not really taken the time to listen to because I was mindful of the next person coming into my office. And so I think the buffer time one is big. And then the cell phone placement is another one our family's really working on too. We mentioned this, I can't remember if it's in the book or if it's in the challenge calendar that we put together, but this idea of having a cell phone box in your house where you like walk into your house and like that's where your phone goes. And so that's something we're talking about kind of implementing into our new environment and our new lives in Texas as well, just so that we can be more present with each other.
One thing I try to do with my kids, and it's not in the book, is the first 2 weeks of school, I try to make our schedule as empty and boring as possible. Just for, cognitive overload and the feeling of hurry and busy is something that impacts our kids. If we're hurrying and we're busy and we're like, oh, you've got violin lessons and basketball and we got all these things, those are all really good things. But during moments of like big transition, I think to love our children as our neighbors well is to also protect their kind of lives from distraction and to be fully present with them. So a lot of times to this day after school, like my son comes home and we sit down at a table and we just eat a snack together, very boring, slowly. But I'm able to just sit and give all of my attention to him, and I've protected that time. And in the winter, it looks like tea in front of our fire, our gas fire. It's so easy to just like turn the knob and it turns on. But I think about that a lot, especially as somebody in Christian education, that it's kind of, the book's written for like a person to think about themselves. But I think a lot of the ideas translate to like how you're a good parent or how you treat your spouse. We do talk about that more specifically. So if you want to read all the dirt on our marriages, I'm just kidding. But I think a lot of these do, if you think about it and you're like, oh yeah, what does our calendar look like as a family? Do we have space where we're just kind of doing nothing together? It's easy to fill all the time of a day from wake up till sleep with, activities and screens and meals that are like rushed through. But I think if we slow the pace of our lives, it'll help us love each other better. Because our neighbors, all the people we meet, including our family.
Yeah. It is in the book, Katie, and I didn't tell you this, but I used that this week because it's in my head that you all do that. And my kids just started school yesterday and we got invited to dinner on Friday. And it feels like a big deal because we're new to a place, and that was like a very kind invitation, and everything in me was like, you need to say yes to this invitation. And I was like, my kids are going to be so overstimulated by the end of this very first week in a new like environment in a new school. I was like, I think I just can't. Like, I think I have to say no and try to protect them in it. And it's because you wrote the book that I did that.
Okay, well, I don't even know what the book's about. I can't believe you're interviewing us.
It's.
I remember now that I wrote that. Anyway,
I think Barbara Brown Taylor describes the practice of Sabbath as the practice of saying no. So turning down something that otherwise, I totally can relate to new in town, wanting to connect with people. What a generous invitation. I also have that kind of some variation of FOMO where it's if I say no to this, they'll never invite me again. And this potential friendship is dissolved. And just the discipline of saying this is space that is needed for us to recharge, to acclimate, to be present with each other. That's a daily practice. I'm also thinking about Katie, maybe more from your lens, the church gives us these ancient practices as well, these spiritual disciplines that in many ways are ancient wisdom that tells what psychology might be teaching us now. But the church has been trying to practice these disciplines, Sabbath being an example of one, for a very, very long time. I was just talking with some folks in our congregation who had been attending kind of a more contemporary feel, kind of non-denominational church where their children had, the kids section that you go to with the lights and the screens and the characters and all of that. And this mother said to me, our daughter who's 6 said, "Mom, I just want to go to boring church." So we're boring church over here. But I also thought that was sort of there's a bit of a call in the voice of a child there. Like, I just want to go to a place where it's not about stimulation. It is about presence. So Katie, what are some of the ancient practices of the church that might be helpful to reclaim?
Yeah, well, so I am part of another project right now where we're kind of gleaning the wisdom of youth ministers and talking to, and my role is to be a listener. And so Erin Heisler, who's in Michigan, and she's amazing. She's a youth minister, and she was talking about how right now in her youth group, there's just a lack of trust among students. Like, the presence of phones is not just a distraction, but like somebody could be recording me. Someone could take a picture and text it and embarrass me or alter it. And how the antidote, or the thing that it seems that where the kids feel safe and trust and safety and trust and restorative. And it's funny because she's using like Pokemon language, because I'm sure it comes from her youth group, but the summer camp retreat, the week-long phone-free retreat is legendary. And it's because all of these fun, beautiful, silly, restorative, crazy things happen there. And that's not because there's no stimulus. It's because these attention-seeking nonstop things, or a nonstop schedule with time, times where you have to be somewhere, you're always late, or you're always trying to rush out the door, they don't exist. And you just have this, we have a place we go in the winter called Meany Lodge. And what I love about going there is I never know what time it is. It feels like Sabbath every single weekend. I'm like, I just woke up when I woke up. Mm-hmm. And I just went to sleep when I was tired. And there's no internet there. So I'm like, and I just played games when my kids said, "Do you want to play a game?" And it sounds ridiculous that would be like a wildly different space. But I think sometimes we think of Sabbath as like the word boring, like I've just got to be still and doing nothing. But I think Sabbath is really about restoration, and restoration in some sense can be the removal of the things that drain, and which makes space for the relational, restorative, loving, and restorative, and enough sleep, listening to your body's needs, listening to your children and your spouse's needs, having enough space for kind of a conversation that starts kind of in a weird way or a boring way and then leads to some really profound insights where there's enough time. So I would say, I think in American society, there are very few protected spaces anymore. Kids are lucky. They can go to camp. They can go on a retreat. But for adults, like, where can you go where your cell phone doesn't work? I mean, whenever my phone falls in the toilet and doesn't work for like 4 days and is in a bag of rice, I'm like, freedom! I like literally every time I'm like, why do I go back to it? I think in the discussion guide we created, I wrote like, if you were to describe your relationship with your phone as like a lover, like, how would you describe it? Are you like, I miss you so much when you're gone. I can't wait when we're together again, but you're too much. It's all the time, nonstop. Like, will you just give me some space, But I think, yeah, I would say, like, just to name one would be the sense of retreat. And the other one we talk about in the book is table fellowship. Like really being present to the person who's across from you and getting to know their story. I think when we're told in scripture that we meet Christ in others, that happens. That's real. But you have to choose to be in spaces where you're with somebody across the table, eating a meal, taking the time, learning their story, and believing that Jesus Christ is there in the person that you will meet. And I think if we want to be transformed, that's one beautiful way that God tells us we can be, to meet him.
Again, a good segue is we could talk about these sort of external circumstantial challenges that we've had. Just you're mentioning, if you were to think of your relationship with your phone as a relationship, I'm becoming familiar with the term synthetic relationships, with artificial intelligence now creating these basically always on friends, bots that we are to relate to. And just the phrase synthetic relationship seems to me, if not oxymoronic, at least counter to what Scripture teaches us relationship is, right? That embodiment is essential for relationship, and a phone or a bot is not a body, and therefore not capable of relationship. So synthetic and relationship don't. But I do want to move to kind of some of those internal feelings, inclinations, the temptations that sort of tug at us. And my favorite writer is Marilyn Robinson, and she says, we no longer deal with one another soul to soul, and the churches are as answerable for this as anyone. We no longer deal with one another soul to soul. And Brittany, when I read about your research on dehumanization, and the sections on dehumanization and contempt, and this idea of seeing each other soul to soul, and the immense challenges we have right now relating to each other as a human being to a human being, not just individually, but now categorically, right? That people are not often dehumanized at an individual level, but we're dehumanizing groups and categories of people. Talk about these as barriers to love. It's obvious that they are, but I think they're so ingrained now. And about your research on dehumanization, because I think it's a really important lens for this.
Yeah, thanks. I guess just to start, it might be helpful for folks to think about like how psychologists define dehumanization. And so one of the ways that we measure dehumanization is by looking at how people attribute traits like cognitive traits, and then also like emotional traits to themselves versus to other people. And so we'll often talk about like mechanistic dehumanization and animalistic dehumanization. And mechanistic dehumanization is when you start to think of people more like machines, more like a robot, more like you can just be a worker who works, and never needs to sleep and never needs to eat and never needs to take care of your body. Or we can think about animalistic dehumanization, where we're starting to liken people to non-human animals in the sense that we maybe think that they don't have some of kind of the more rational component, like the ability for self-restraint, for example. And both of these types of dehumanization are really consequential. But a lot of my work suggests that the most consequential is the animalistic dehumanization, when you start to think about people as not having some of these kind of higher level cognitive capacities. And this tends to be amplified when people don't care about social justice issues. And so one of, I think, the most interesting insights from my work lately has been that you can help to reduce dehumanization. Like we can help people to start to see individuals experiencing homelessness as more human by having them learn about individuals experiencing homelessness's circumstances and the things that led up to their homelessness. But if you reduce dehumanization without amplifying social justice motivations, then that doesn't translate into action well. And so it's interesting because I think this narrative around dehumanization is one that's getting pretty popular in the media. And it's certainly something we need to work to alleviate, because we aren't going to love people we don't see as worthy of love. As terrible as that sounds, there's all of these mental calculations we're doing all of the time to think about, like, does this person deserve my help? And when you dehumanize somebody, you think of them as less worthy or less deserving of your help. But if we just alleviate dehumanization and we don't help people care about social justice issues, it seems like that translation isn't going to like really manifest into actions in the ways that we would want it to. And so I hope to be sharing kind of this like twofold message, right? That dehumanization is both a cause and a consequence. And as we continue to see injustice in the world, and as we continue to see like, such different stratifications of like social resources and all of these things, it will continue to perpetuate dehumanization because it's making us feel better. Like, I don't know how to justify seeing somebody on the street in Seattle homeless. I don't know how to like justify that I go back to a warm home. And so what I start to do to like make myself feel better is on this non-conscious level, I start to think of them as less human, and I start to think of them as more quote unquote deserving of that. And so this talks or connects to this concept called the belief in the just world that we talk about a lot in the book, that we start to tell ourselves these stories that people are where they are because of the choices they've made rather than because of the circumstances that they've encountered. And so as soon as we have a justification for not helping somebody, we won't.
Okay, so this is not in our book. This is a different book. Okay, I'm going to just totally plug this other book I'm reading right now. Are you reading this, Chris?
I have read it. Yeah, I have
read it. So Ezra Klein, he's like, and Derek Thompson, he's like, homelessness is a housing problem. And it's like musical chairs. The people who are homeless are not homeless because of something they did or who they are, or they didn't work hard enough. It's like if you take 10 chairs and then you take away one, and the 10 people need to sit in 10 chairs, the most vulnerable person will be the one who ends up without housing or without a chair. And so I think this actually really synergistically goes along with your research, our research together on perceptions of, how people dehumanize each other, and that our brain wants to blame the wrong thing. We want to blame the person. They're just a person who's kind of, for whatever reason, they've been dealt a really challenging hand. And that might have to do with a lot of different things. But to provide housing for somebody, it's literally like building policies in cities that cause homelessness, because people with mental health problems, people with disabilities, people who are poor have housing in other cities. So I think it's I really am convicted reading this book. I'm like, I wish we could go back and edit that chapter and be like, homelessness is a housing issue, a policy issue. But anyway,
which is also
throw that in there.
That phrase is the title of another really good book on homelessness and housing. Homelessness is a housing problem. I think Greg Coburn, who was here in Indianapolis a couple of years ago and has done a lot of research on this. To me, it relates as well, Brittany, to your description, because I think part of the challenge we're facing, and I see it in a place like the one I serve, is we are afforded the comfort of distance from people who are suffering in those ways. Should we choose to kind of protect our comfort in that way? And in subtle ways, in conscious ways, in subconscious ways, we do that all the time, right? We choose the path we travel, we choose the place we live, we choose the place we go to the coffee shop, whatever that may be. And sometimes we're consciously saying, I want to be, I don't want to be with those people. I want to be with these people. And other times it just becomes sort of the pattern of our lives. So one voice that's been really helpful to me here is Brian Stevenson in the Equal Justice Initiative, who writes about the power of proximity. And I think, Brittany, some of what I hear you describing is distance versus proximity, in terms of it becomes easier and easier to dehumanize when you have the comfort of distance or the option of distance, I guess. And it really goes back to the homeless encampment experiment and practice that you all begin with, because that was bringing people into proximity with folks who you just naturally have all sorts of stereotypical opinions of, whether grounded in reality or not.
Yeah. And I think the crazy thing is, and I mean, Brian Stevenson's work says this so well, like the closer you get, the more compassion you have. It's not like you get close and you hate more, right? But if you're always separated, if you never talk to a person, if you never enter their space, if those hierarchies of power or privilege are never disrupted, that's what solidifies stereotypes and it kind of reinforces them. But when you start to disrupt that, I think that's what's so powerful. And we talk in the book, I think, now I'm like questioning everything, about Karl Barth's like mutual seeing, mutual hearing, like delighting in someone else. Like you can't really enjoy a person until you get to know them. I mean, I feel like Brittany and we've spent so much time together. She's like my sister now, but we have so many funny stories together, right? Like you love someone more when you spend time with them and you're close to them. Also, the people who are, I mean, in Seattle, when you live in a city, there's overlapping layers of social wealth, like where I live, we have $1 million homes and we have government supported housing and tiny homes, and we have people living outside, and we are all mixed together. And one thing I was talking about with my students last quarter, and this was related actually to deportation, is I have friends who are undocumented, and I have a lot of friends who are citizens. But one of the students in my class, and I was talking about ways, like strategies for like in this moment when people fear deportation, if you want them in your neighborhood, what are things you can do? And there are things I do because I love my neighbors who live near me and they're my friends. But in his community, all the people who lived in his community were all not citizens of the United States, and they couldn't protect each other. If somebody showed up, everybody was in trouble. So I think when we isolate our communities from each other, we can't really help each other very well because any outsider feels untrustworthy. So when to me, the practical implication is like when you're voting for building codes, if you work in city planning, people want their house to be worth more money, but I want to live in a community where my kids are friends with people that are of a variety of social backgrounds, a variety of economic classes. But most neighborhoods in America, because of a history of redlining and all this other stuff, we don't live that way. But I'm convicted as a Christian, like I'm not supposed to be isolated and just with my demographic. But it's hard because that means like the literal conversations I have with my literal neighbors when we're talking about the new apartment that's going up in the neighborhood and everyone's against it and I'm for it. Those are awkward. And my husband and I are like, we think high density housing is good. We think low rent is good. We want apartments that are for families, not just for up and coming, like tech people. We want 3, 4, 5 bedroom apartments. So I think it gets really practical, and it's awkward and uncomfortable to have those conversations, especially when people feel like their wealth and that what they can give to their children is connected.
Yeah, and I think all helpful. And of course, for people of faith, there's sort of a theological conviction at the core of this, which is that dehumanization is ultimately the denial of the image of God in someone else, right? And so as much as we can debate policy approaches to specific challenges, what we really are not permitted to do as followers of Jesus or as people of faith is to practice dehumanization, is to say someone is less than human, because the core conviction of our faith is that we're created in the image of the divine.
Yeah, I think a really nice study that connects to this is another way they frame dehumanization looks at high level, middle level, and low level needs. And one way we dehumanize people is just to say they have a lot of low level needs. They need food, water, and shelter, just like any other non-human animal would. But to deny that they have these high level needs, like the need for purpose and meaning and self-actualization. And so I think when we think about trying to define, or think about the image of God, thinking about humans being created with the ability for creativity or for connection and for belonging and for all of these, purpose and meaning and all of these kind of deeper things. If we are dehumanizing people, especially when we dehumanize individuals experiencing homelessness, we start to say, you don't have any of that. Like, you don't need that. You don't need belonging, connection, and purpose in the way that I do. And we often find that our students are surprised by like individuals who would choose not to be in some sort of like shelter when there's an option to be in a shelter for the night. And when you start to help them to understand being in that shelter might mean not being with my partner. It might mean not being with my kids. It might mean being separated from my community. They're choosing belonging over a low level physical need. And so it helps to start to kind of correct this like framing of all you should care about is food, water, and shelter. No, like actually there's all of these other things that make them human, just like you're human, that they're striving for, right? They need to be in community and have belonging and to see like why they matter, right, in the world, the purpose they play. And so I think that can stretch us more in a deeper direction of the way that we are even just defining dehumanization. I like that framing.
And there is a practical impact to this as well, or a systemic impact. I think Raj Chetty has done a significant amount of research about the greatest predictor of breaking generational cycles of poverty is having relationships with people who are not also experiencing poverty. So when we build the kinds of communities, Katie, that you're describing, where we are interacting with, grocery shopping with, spending time with, our kids are playing together across some of those socioeconomic lines, it also tends to give opportunities for people who may not have those opportunities if they're in isolated communities that are entirely made up of people who are just struggling day by day to get by. So I think there is both practical and sort of spiritual or moral dimensions to this.
You're absolutely right. And I'm so glad there's like thoughtful pastors like you kind of with big congregations to say like, invite people to imagine their life differently. Because I think there's a ladder of success that everyone wants to like climb. And when you've built enough wealth where you feel like I can just get one rung higher and then we have a chapter on like, what if you just stayed where you are? What if you like continue to live where you are? How can you invest in your community? Well, you get I love that my kids have reading tutors who, their first language maybe wasn't English, that they're sitting together learning to read, they're helping my kid read, or for me, you have to kind of help people imagine or redefine like what's a worthy life or what's a great life for you or what's your dream life. I'm kind of notorious for emailing people. This is my dream life for the winter. I want to go to trapeze school. I want to do one overnight at a ski hut. But I think like naming like what are your goals? What's your dream life? Otherwise, and I'm in a business family, it, but like the marketing departments of different companies have an idea for you, what that dream life is. And it's to wear all Nike. It's to whatever. Even my kid has a Nike swoosh on his retainer, right? Like they want a brand, they have an idea and a vision for you. But if you don't claim what it is, and for Christians, claiming what it is in tension with some of those, the world, wants our goals to be for our life.
Yeah.
And I would add, I think like what you both are talking about is like an interdependence that's important to name. Like there's proximity without humanity. There is proximity without seeing people as more human or being changed by them, right? And so one of the things our work together has helped us to name, I think a lot more clearly, is that like if you maintain a power dynamic in your proximity, you aren't going to be changed by. You are not going to be loving your neighbor in the ways that we are being called to love our neighbor. And so I think that we can run the risk of saying to people, all that matters is being proximal, all that matters is being close, without saying you need to be vulnerable to be changed by. See how you can celebrate other people and be celebrated, to help and to be helped, right? And that's where I really do like Karl Barth's like this idea of mutuality, for it to be so bi-directional, because I think a lot of Christians, and especially the way I was raised, run the risk of like, yes, it's good to like give to the poor and to like have like this, a downward kind of approach to the way that we maintain our proximity that's comfortable for us, but also kind of allows us to mentally check a box of like, I was proximal today. I know that I interacted with somebody experiencing homelessness today. And so, circling back to the tent city study, that's a lot of what my research showed, is that our students who had the best perceptions of individuals experiencing homelessness coming in, so the least dehumanization, actually had the worst experience with tent city, like in terms of they started to dehumanize individuals experiencing homelessness more. And I think it's because that setting disrupted them in a way that they weren't comfortable. They were used to interacting from a power dynamic position rather than from something that started to equalize.
That's really interesting.
We're having dinner together on campus, we're having conversations together. We are now in a community dependent on one another for safety even, right? And so I think, hopefully our work kind of pushes that idea of proximity alone is sufficient. It's a certain type of proximity that really matters.
Yes. This is so rich, and I don't want to kind of land the plane. I want to ask, maybe pull three words together that feature prominently in sections of the book, two of them in the title itself, and then you end with this, in one of the final sections, this sort of ode to persistence. And Katie, you earlier mentioned sort of the state of the world and people feeling the heaviness and the kind of fragmentation and the anxiety, and people. I experience it in my pastoral life that people are feeling the weight of the times in which we live, and it seems to me like part of what persistence is that kind of keep on keeping on through the most challenging of times. The other words that go together in the title are transformation and community, and I think those are so closely tied together. Early in the conversation, you mentioned that the goal of the book, the hope of the book, was really to be transformative. That your hope is to catalyze change in the way people think about their practices of neighbor love, so that almost a ladder up to more to larger scale transformation. And certainly that happens through the presence of community. So I'm thinking about the persistent practices done in community that lead to transformation, and a voice in my head throughout reading the book, because I think he mentored not just me, but really a whole generation of practical theologians, indirectly and directly, was Craig Dykstra, who we lost this last year, and who really spent his entire writing and thinking and speaking and mentoring life helping us better understand the practices that lead to transformation, always in the context of community, both the accountability and the support of community. So can you give us sort of a challenge and a word of hope for persisting in disciplines that transform us and the communities that we're a part of?
Oh, yeah, man. I think one of the things I would challenge people to do and say is the most hopeful thing you could do would be to find the thing that you're going to do that there's a chapter on taking responsibility, and you're going to say, this team of little boys needs a basketball coach. And people might say, because I'm the pastor of Second Presbyterian Church, he's so busy, he has too much time. He doesn't have the bandwidth to coach this little boys team. And I know that you've done this, Chris, that you say to yourself, I'm gonna be the coach of that team, and love these kids and teach them to love basketball and teach them new ways to deal with conflict and disappointment and losing a game, but also teach them how to be brave winners, right? So today at 2:30, I'm going to take a group of kids up on a ski bus. I bought a 12-passenger van, which is like a whole podcast in itself. But anyway, once a youth minister, always a youth minister. But one of my kids said, other people want to come on the bus. And I was like, well, tell them, like, we'll go next week. I think each of us can choose. You don't have to choose a big thing. You can choose one thing where other people look at you and say, wow, that makes, like, you're getting to know my kids. You're loving the kids in our neighborhood. And you know who I'm going to bring? Anyone who wants to go. And you know who I'm going to feed on that trip? Anyone who's hungry. I think it starts with, like, seeing something and making a choice to love a group that just needs to be loved. And it doesn't have to be some, like, heroic thing. It can be something that's just really specific, and where you're like, I'm going to do it for 10 weeks and we'll see how it goes. And then maybe I'll do it next year for 10 weeks. But I think that's the way neighborhoods are transformed, through individuals taking responsibility and just like deeply loving a group and bringing them together and giving them an experience of a different way of being. So I think you're an exemplar of this, Chris.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
Yeah, one thing I think I really like to say, and I do a lot of virtue research, but it's just like this kind of paradox that you cultivate character in community, but it takes a certain level of character to stay in community as well. And so I like to think about this idea of like, if people really want to grow, and we believe like that's people's heart and intention, like we approach this book and we write it to an audience saying like, we know your heart is in the right place. If they really want to grow, the best thing they can do is stay rooted in the same community. And right now in this, we talk about this in one of the chapters of the book, it's so easy to leave your community. It's so easy to say, I don't like the way that this church feels for this particular reason. Or it's so easy to say like, oh, that book club just rubbed me the wrong way that day, or that lady offended me, and so I'm never going to go back, that kind of thing. And it's easy to put ourselves in silos where we just get a message of like just a reverberation of what we want to hear, I think. And so I think one challenge and hope for me right now is just to say like, can I embrace growth through staying even when it's hard? And also to think about, I'm trying to find the right way to frame this because it's a message I don't think everybody's ready to hear, but I think that there is an over amplification of how polarized we have become. And I think that it's easy to let that illusion kind of run wild if we only stay in our silos. And so I think if we are taking the time to have more conversations with people at the grocery store, or just like getting to have those one-on-one conversations, we can start to correct that narrative that we are so far divided that it's like beyond reconciliation or beyond hope. And so I think hope for me right now is coming in just like the everyday conversations with people who maybe on the surface at least weren't in a group that I would have identified with initially. And I hope people are trying to do that a lot more right now, because I think it'll start to correct some of the bias that we have to think we're more polarized than we are.
It's a really hopeful word. I confess to not having thought as much about this piece. I really appreciate what you started with, that sometimes in the church we really obsess over people who get mad and leave, but maybe we don't pay enough attention to people who get mad and stay. There's a real power in, I'm really in tension with, or in disagreement with, or struggling with this part of being in this community, and what I'm going to do is stay, right? What I'm going to do. Just a very quick story. I remember when my dad left the church that he was serving in Greensboro, North Carolina, and there's a pillar of the church, consummate church lady, Miss Lena, and Miss Lena was probably in her 90s, and a new pastor came to the church, and I went and visited and was talking with Miss Lena. I was in college, and I said, well, what do you think of the new pastor? And Miss Lena said, what I think of him is I was here before he got here, and I will be here after he is gone. Something about saying, this is my community, these are my people, and through the struggle, I'm going to stay. The practice of home that you all described too. Boy, what a great conversation. Do you all have time for a quick lightning round before I let you go?
Sure.
Okay, we'll be quick. Katie, what is one underrated spiritual practice?
I would just want to say joy in the wilderness, like getting lost somewhere and delighting in it.
Awesome. Brittany, empathy. Are we born with it, or is it built?
It's built.
For you both, what's one habit you've built from writing this book?
I think I mentioned mine earlier. I think time in between meetings and cell phones being put away more. Those are two habits I've really built a lot from this book.
I would say when someone critiques or makes a request or critiques something I'm doing, I spend more time thinking about how they're right than defending myself. And I'm like, okay, like if they're right, maybe they're right. They're right. Okay, how will I change? Instead of being just immediately like, what a jerk. They're annoying.
Two more for both of you. The church would love better if it stopped.
If it could help people stop feeling contempt within marriages. Mm-hmm. I think that's where contempt is the most damaging, and it damages within a family unit that then spreads to communities. So I would say, and we didn't talk about it in this, but we have a chapter about contempt.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that came first to mind for me was stop talking to only other Christians. Mm. So there's some psych research around, Christians are not more helpful than other folks except for two other Christians. That there's just like this really kind of like in-group help and in-group pro-social behavior that's driving that. And so I think getting outside of that bubble.
Last question on the heels of the publication of your book. What's feeding your hope right now?
These are really good and hard questions. They're not lightning.
I know they're not really lightning round. Yeah, fair.
I'm impressed by people's desire right now to take action and make a change. Like everyone we have talked to about this book, and every time we kind of talk about it, I think the practical nature of the book comes up, and I think people right now are feeling the urgency of like, if they don't know what to do or they're not doing something, they're like, I should be doing something. Mm-hmm. And that gives me hope. Just the awareness that like, things are not right. This is not okay. I want to do something, but I'm not sure what. That gives me hope that there's a discomfort in the present moment for most people.
Yeah, mine's exactly the same. I think that people's discontent with the division, with the polarization, with all of these things that we're kind of being presented in the media is a real signal that people know this is not how it's supposed to be, and it's not what I want. I want unity. I want more loving actions. I want people to be treated with more humanity. I want bigger tables and more open doors and less fear and less of a scarcity mindset. And so I think that people that like the frustration level to me is a really good indicator, because if we weren't frustrated, we would be just accepting this state of the world as if it was normal or like what we expected it to be. But we have hope and an imagination that it can be something more beautiful than this. And I think that's a really good sign.
Amen and amen. So the book is Love Your Neighbor, How Psychology Can Enliven Faith and Transform Community. The authors are Katherine Douglas and Brittany Tausen. The book is out January 15th from Erdman's, so you can pick up your copy as soon as you end this podcast. Katie and Brittany, thank you for this conversation, which I found both inspiring and helpful. And thank you for writing a book that's both deeply researched and immediately practical. It's given us a lot to think about, but more importantly, it's given us a challenge for how to love and live better. So thank you both for your writing and for your witness, and for being our guests on Faithful Discourse.
Thank you so much, Chris.
And to all of you who are listening, we hope that you'll review the podcast, share it with a friend, leave a comment or a rating, and let us know what you'd like to hear in a future episode of Faithful Discourse. Until next time, take care of each other.